excuse the blurry interface there, or I mean camera. Still decide what I'm gonna do about that. Toe is better. No blood infection. At least not at this point. Fever pretty much reduced. That was nasty. Just a nasty month-long period, especially before I found out that was happening. Yeah, pain reduced all that. I didn't go full. Excuse me. I didn't go full surgery. Try not to breathe into the mic as well. I didn't go full surgery. That might not be necessary. And as well, I got injectable lidocaine and injected it. And as soon as the toe was numb, and I was like poking around, I was like, "There's no way I am gonna excise the toenail in a nailectomy," because at that point it's numb, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. If there was a piece of wood jammed an inch into my toe, it's like, alright, just rip it out, clean the wound, irrigate it, which is what I did. I basically just irrigated it and opened it up a little bit. And it's like, that's what you do. It's self-explanatory and apparent of what needs to be done. But then with the nail, the way, the depth that it grows, and it was like unknown territory. I couldn't bring myself to do it, and I wouldn't be, as long as I don't get an infection from here on out, I would be recovering at this point, and probably in a little bit of pain, and it would just be, my body would be repairing it a lot more at this point. I gotta align my whole chain sprocket derailleur assembly. That's why you'll hear it click every once in a while. So yeah, that was that. I'm trying not to name names here. Basically, the secret groups, they're all in on it. The researcher Donald Marshall. All right, that's how it's treated. It's a game, and there's reasons for that. There's reasons for why it's set up like that. For instance, one of the things I wanted to talk about is how, if you look at theory, basically, I can't think of the exact terminology here, but ultimately, you look at the advancement of technology and its impact on society, and the resulting changes in, oh my gosh, resulting changes in biology. Ultimately, you'll get to a point in history where, through technology or through spiritual advancement, people can live for a longer period of time. His car just died. And so, the high end of that is basically the what is the word? The end of death, basically. And so there are many different ways to look at that. But eventually, the end result, whether it's technological or spiritual, is overcoming death. And I should really realign the gears tonight. That's going to be dark. And so basically, that's where the explanation gets real weird to understand. Okay, so humanity's overcome death. Okay, then what is life like then? What is society then? And that's where kind of like this reverse explanation comes into play, where at this point, well, what does death mean to us now? What is the role of these boundaries, the concept of that in this society? At this point, that's where the explanation comes that this is basically a society of death. That if we didn't have death, the society the way it is wouldn't exist anymore. It wouldn't be the same. And so, this is right where I found that cell phone. Excuse me. There's $400-something cell phone. Dude was real happy. I'm sure the next guy wouldn't have taken it. That's a bit of coincidence. I got up early, randomly, to come this way and found the phone. Something told me to go out. Anyway, and so the idea is, what kind of society would that be, and what would we know, and how would it be different in terms of life and death, and in that sense, spirituality, the higher self, the soul, where we would be outside of the body, if we left the body, how all that would change. Eventually, it's the same situation. It's two paths to get there, and there might be a kind of deviation between the technological and spiritual, all the way up to the point where there's a complete return to source. And remember, a complete return to source, in terms that a lot of people talk about, is pretty much spiritual death, or a complete return of identity, a dissolution of identity back into the sea of consciousness, and there's no you at that point. So the complete return to source is not necessarily what it's supposed to be, right away. If it's, that's what people are chasing right away, it's because that's the AI attempting to use their spiritual source and dissolve them, and at that point there's no there's no path between where they are and then forward in personal experience. It's a complete resolution and a return. And so the whole point is, what does that mean? That without the return, people are kind of still in that distance away from the absolution of being. Well, yeah, that's the point, but that's what physical life or individual experience is. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't have any experience. It's the same thing with time and everything. It's an illusion. It's separation from the one. Well, that's the point. Why do you think we're here? Because the one steps down into experience to have these parallels running congruently, and the goal is to live here in the knowledge of the one. That's the whole point. To basically return is a kind of a mind trick to get people to kind of dissolve themselves, because there are midwayer beings that are stuck in the kind of border area between here and there, and they feed on the energy of those pretty much trapped, bouncing back and forth. Because the other thing is, if you're not ready to return, and you attempt to return, you'll either experience a very rapid dissolution, basically, a kind of acceleration, deceleration process, which would be, I don't know how to really describe that, or it'll be the same thing, but acceleration, deceleration, and the person will get bounced back pretty much, which is what humanity's more or less been doing for a very, very long time. In that friction, basically the fear, the emotional friction, the loss of identity, that's like a soul stock for these intermediary beings. Would have been described all throughout history. Literally a genetic stock of souls that they can hijack, and they feed off the energy. So it's literally all about programming. People are programmed to create that output, and society is programmed through these founders of these programmed like cultures, if you will, and then it repeats itself. They let go, they come down, go away for a couple thousand years, and come back, and it's the same setup over and over again. And it's like a soul stock, a soul farm. And there's advanced technology and like weather manipulation and things like that, which is used to recreate these events, which are basically apocalyptic insertion points of memory and experience on a mass scale that are used to provoke or reinstigate these kind of pseudo-religious behaviors and outcomes. Because on a spiritual level, if people are more or less giving their energy away to somebody who is on this plane and as acting as a intermediary for one of these interdimensional groups, it's hard to describe, but it's kind of like fishing for men. It's kind of like their mind being focused with that intention on the frequency of those individuals, of those groups and those symbols, because of the way the mind works, and you're basically painting your reality with each thought, It's like you're entering program codes and commands. It reels the individual soul into a kind of dimensional overlay, a temporal outcome, a imagination land realm of the choice of the being who created that programming, who created the symbols, the words, the religious or cultural ideologies or belief systems based upon certain rituals and expectations. In other words, it's kind of like you create what you experience what you create in your mind. And so if they get us to create the experience that involves them coming in wearing their suit and cape and outfit and all that stuff, then we created a mental plane for them to exist in, and they live in the recess of our spiritual mind at that point. And they live literally like a leech in our stuff. And it's just the strangest thing, but that's what it is. And that's where the idea of the archons comes in, to the point where beings found they could do this, and they don't have the creative capacity, and so at that point they require this process in order to exist. And it's to the point where it goes on for so long that if they don't continue that process occurring, basically brainwashing the population, then they don't exist at all, and it becomes like a life and death situation for either of us. And then it goes a little bit deeper than in that, to the concept of different bloodlines of humanity that have been affected by this, who view it in a similar life and death situation based upon who's going to feed who to these interdimensional parasites, more or less. The primary outcome, the remedy, is that there are multiple timelines, and instead of compressing down to just one or two, the idea is that there is one constant across all outcomes, which is that no human falls for the same programming consciousness tricks that we've been falling for thousands of years, or at least people have. And that's the only constant, to the degree where then the parasite, the infection, is kicked once and for all. And it's very strange to think about that in terms of, across all parallels, all higher dimensional spaces, what that means is all electromagnetic energy out of all the living beings on the planet. There are no interdimensional parasites leeching in the background, the unconscious imagination of a person's mind, where they're experiencing uncontrolled parasitic behavior and addictions and habitual negativity on a spiritual level. Remember, negativity isn't evil or bad. It's like saying positive and negative, and one or the other is better than the other. It's a balance. It's that imbalance of one or the other is bad, and it's really not bad. It just means that's what drives entropy, and entropy leads to death. It leads to an excess emission of energy, and if you need more energy, then you're going to run out eventually, or you're going to have to vampire in a way off of something's dead, off of other beings, in a way that supersedes your natural biological format or nature, basically, for getting energy in a much less aggressive manner. And that describes our entire ecosystem right there. We have some animals that are pretty much designed to devour other animals 24/7. Not 24/7, but that's their game. And then others are in a kind of symbiosis with the whole, and it's as if everyone's kind of like living happily as a family. Our ecosystem wasn't always like this. At least the ones that we have that are present here, they're two different universes put together by somebody who thought it would be funny, which is the whole mad scientist thing that I've talked about recently. And so, and the other aspect of that, you could look at just a side thing, which is kind of a first rant in a while, just to do it again. Which is that you have animals, look at the squirrels. All year round, they're either running around like they are now, and they started a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's October, and I'm sweating, and it was like 4 weeks ago I had a hoodie on. I'm not even gonna go into that, but and apparently that's a natural cycle of weather, that it does it every few thousand years, and it's happening now, and it's not going to stop. And all the work of the projects is to mitigate that, so that people have a time to wake up, because we have a limited window of opportunity to wake up, and the control groups want to use people as vessels or stop them from waking up, or both in the same. But the idea is that those animals, they live pretty much looking for food or a way to reproduce, and more or less 24/7 that's what they're doing. They don't really have time to enjoy, you know, what they want to. Their enjoyment is found through a real enjoyment, but it's binary. They feel great pleasure when they have food. It's, you know, fantabulous. And so they have that, and that's their joy, you know. It's and even then it's probably short-lived. It's probably like a kind of addiction, you know. It's probably literally almost just like an addiction or something. But the idea is, if they have food, they're secure and safe, they reproduce or whatever, then they have that burst of extreme pleasure on a spiritual level that would be like, you know, winning the lottery or something, which is the terrible terrible example, because that's just the cult of materialism right there, which is part of the parasite. It's, you know, like having a family, or seeing living a good life, basically, or doing something great for yourself and others. But then you got to imagine, now they got to worry about a predator finding their nest or going out and getting food, and that's when you see squirrels basically skitzing out, looking over their shoulder every 5 seconds, extremely happy, and then scared, happy and frightened, and dodging cars and stuff. And so it's a rough existence. However, that binary interplay is present, and that's how they get their enjoyment. It's equal. Where there is enjoyment, there is stress, but where there is stress, there's going to be pleasure and enjoyment, because that's just how it's going to work. And then so you have now the human way and the proto-human. Humans aren't technically from monkeys, but you see similarities in the apes, actually. And so in the primate species, basically their cultural system, you see it's more socially bound or relative, where now they have these cycles where it's not just about securing their freedom or security, not really freedom, but, you know, their security and food and reproduction. Now it's about how to more or less belong in the community, and it gets real weird, where there's laughter and jokes and fights, and there's like this this culture, basically, that begins to replace that purely binary interplay of pleasure and pain based upon food, security, reproduction, and suffering or death. And you see, it's the same kind of intensity spread out over a much larger spectrum, where you have dude in the winter running around looking for food, and if he doesn't get that, well, then he feels death creeping up on him, and it's like the worst feeling you could imagine. Literally the worst feeling that could exist. Like, I don't know, you know, just imagine that. And so that drives that animal to go find food literally 24/7. Well, not 24/7, but, you know, obviously they sleep. But all day, that's what they do. They're not worried about, they're not looking for other enjoyment. They're not worried about how they're going to impress somebody else, or what clothes they're going to wear, or even just a simple communal social gathering type situation. They're not worried about that. They don't have time, they don't have the energy, they don't have the expansion, the complexity in their spectrum of behaviors and emotions. It's just simple, oh crap, I'm going to die if I don't get food. But then imagine they get the food, and imagine the feeling of like, we did it. We survived the atmospheric Titanic coming to freeze everything over. For instance, having the food and nesting in, hibernating, or waking up in spring, and the spring dance that animals do. That's intense, amazing, and it's approximate to the greatest joy that we have throughout our existence. And so you see that in the social interests and what's the term? Not preoccupations, but the social systems. I can't think of the word right now. What they preoccupy themselves with and are preoccupied by in other types of animal life, or eventually humans, where you have people, I hate to say it, but people who have committed suicide because they didn't get along at school, okay? They're not going to die. They're not running out of food. They didn't have a disease. They literally got made fun of. And that social connection, that social requirement, the social proximity to the interplay of emotions and what one finds joy in life, or is associated with suffering, is so strong that it literally overtook the natural mechanism for survival and led to the experience that it did. Imagine that. So that's the idea of a cycle out of balance, where it's completely out of balance and disconnected from what it is. But it expresses how the joy that a being feels, like, one of the other races, I don't want to say lower races, but one of the binary races, feels from surviving a harsh winter. The social beings get that from living a life where we're basically able to express ourselves and feel belonging and do it with flair and dress a certain. It's not about materialism and dress. I've never really cared about stuff like that. That's an illusion. It's more so about making people happy and teaching and learning about one another, learning about each other, and being fully present here in the spirit. And in that sense, actually being here and being present, knowing that we're present, not just like living, okay, or surviving, okay. So that's the idea, and it's just an interesting way to look at it and understand. But then you follow the concept along the trend and see that. So then it's the fact that those beings are more advanced in terms of consciousness and behavioral complexity and social complexity or development, and so now they have communal gatherings for food. They can take over an area basically and put their clan down, and at that point they're not going to really worry too much about predators. There's still predators to worry about, but they start to move higher on the scale at that point. So now they have more access to food. They don't have to worry as much. So then, what do then? It doesn't mitigate suffering. It doesn't make it disappear. Now they worry about other things that are before seemingly arbitrary. And you see where this is going. The gorillas worrying about who's going to beat their chest the most, and that becomes then who's going to reproduce the most efficiently or effectively, and the biology integrates into that system to then match the ones beating their chests and growing the strongest with the ones who are going to have the most prominent genetics in that society, you see. And then those cultural behaviors and traits become the prominent concepts or memes that move throughout the gene pool. So it's like a web of entanglement. And the idea here now, when you go all the way forward, we got water on tap. You can poop in a bucket of water, a puddle of water, which is, by the way, some countries still don't have that, and the way we're treating it right now, we're going to run out of water if we just keep doing the way we're doing in these so-called Western civilizations. And food on tap in a store, hence a bike. I'm not going berry picking and I guess kale hunting. Although, in a strange way, if I had opportunity with land, which I've had certain type of organic farming experiences, I could grow nearly everything that I need to eat. And for what I didn't, have immediately I could trade something for. I almost did it in a small backyard before, as far as tomatoes and certain things like that, where I had enough overcrop, I can't think of the word, I could have traded for a lot of stuff throughout the entire season. I saved over winter. Um, I I I just woke up, by the way. I had to take a nap. I was like, it was weird. I'm getting back into the rhythm of, yeah. What is the dehydrated a bunch of tomatoes and it lasted almost the entire winter. They're really good. But the idea is that now we got nothing to worry about. But what does that mean? Does that mean suffering disappears and it's nothing but pleasure and enjoyment of life? Doesn't everybody always say that animals are more happy than people? Because now people are caught up in this game where they're basically trying to impress someone or be somebody they're not, or get the latest thing that they don't need. And so therein lies the problem, and therein lies where this civilization is heading. And it connects to the whole concept of death and the disillusion of death and what that means. Where basically the goal of the projects is to overcome suffering, overcome the necessity of suffering. Where we're at this point is that suffering is being used to delay the progress of the civilization in order to more or less give people enough time to catch up. We're at the limit now where if people don't catch up in this generation, where we are in reality in terms of advanced technology and spiritual understanding, people will never be able to catch up because it will destroy them, it will kill them in order for them to catch up. It'll be too complex it'd be like somebody from the 1800s going into the year 2020. Like the actual, which actually not even. It would literally be like there's no reason, because a few thousand years ago back they had more technology than we have publicly now. But the idea is it would be too overwhelming, it wouldn't make sense. Maybe somebody from the 1600s in America, or 1400s, maybe even some of the natives, the tribes, going into, flying an airplane or something. It'd be a crash. It wouldn't work. And so then that's the equivalent of somebody from this society now being shown the fifth layer underneath some of these government buildings and the technology that they have access to there. It goes any farther and we wait anymore, it's just going to fracture their mind to understand what's going on. So nobody really likes that part of it, but that's what it is. Everything's being held back, people are being lied to so they can catch up, but they have to catch up now. And the other aspect is that you can't really overcome suffering. You can replace that binary system of entanglement and necessity of suffering with some other motivation for use. What it is that we have to become our own creators, our own contributors, our own we have to accept self-responsibility in terms of the choice of how we'll be motivated in contributing to society. That if we don't do that, everything falls apart, even if you can poop in a puddle and press the button and get food. And that's the point, that we have technology that you could press a button and make food appear, and you could eat something and modify your system without producing genetic abnormalities, where you could poop like once a month and everything's just like super efficient. So the idea is that if we go any further into this lack of necessity of that kind of what you could call the stress of existence, without accepting, demanding, ensuring, choosing self-responsibility and self-motivation, then the system falls apart and we end up resorting back to that kind of binary squirrel existence of extreme bipolarity of suffering and joy, which is exactly what we had a few hundred years ago, where people basically feared everything, didn't understand anything, and always listen to the next BS midwayer that came out and said, you got to do what I say, and I'll give you protection, or I'll ensure that you'll live forever, or something like that. Because the idea is, you can see now that people are pretty much slipping back into that. It's either the god of technology or the god of false religion, false spirituality. And it's the strangest thing, but that's what it is. And it comes from that interplay of technology and spiritual awareness, and overcoming suffering, and seeking pleasure. Once we mitigate those impulses, and learn to become the creator of our own, not destiny, but our own self-motivation and contribution to society, that's the mitigation of suffering. And eventually, what that leads to in the next phase is ultimately the overcoming of death, because that's the original state. Death was literally invented as a project to experience motivation in a physical plane. Sounds crazy, but that's what was discovered in the underground bases and the projects. As well, that there are these parasite beings that set up shop and use the whole process to more or less feed on the suffering of people, so that it produces a continuous negative, or like an entropic trend, which always results in the species going lower and lower. And they'll come down, boost everything up with some technology, and then it goes down again. It's a continual crashing effect instead of a trajectory. So they rigged the system, basically, which is, look around, anything, even like the lottery or something, election, something like that, local or otherwise, you can see that the systems can be rigged. And so imagine somebody did that to the galaxy, which is inner as well as what you perceive as outer in this holographic representation. That was pretty ranty, if I might say so myself. I'm gonna go look in this big cuboid thing with a bunch of food in little packages and stuff, and then it's also got some fresh food. The more fresh food, the better, obviously. And I'm gonna try and make another video, and I need to figure out what I want to do with this book. The information's public on the internet, but I know I need to I want to, or I am going to do something fairly interesting in terms of ensuring that the information is available to the public in one way or another. So, thank you for listening. I'll see you again.